when you're working in VFX, the shots start coming back just before final completion. In Mortal Kombat, there was one character called Goro. It's got 4 arms. They literally had 2 stunt guys, one on top of each other, sort of going like this. Then the grayscale comes in, and then the textures come in, and it's just when you finally get it all put together, it's really a lovely moment.
Like this show? Then rate it 5 stars and subscribe to us on YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Uncool is a podcast by Creatives at Work. It is produced, written, and hosted by Sean Lee Win Chong and co-hosted by Yenling Lo, co-produced by Raven Lim, and edited by Ray Ng. Uncool. It's cool to be uncool.
Let me do a quick introduction. Check out this credit list. Mortal Kombat, Peter Rabbit 2, Alien Covenant, Great Gatsby. The list goes on. You just check it out on IMDb, man.
I've been really lucky, yeah.
Even the coolest people have most embarrassing stories to tell. Daniel, I think we'd be quite interested to know exactly what did you do on, in your roles as, VFX editor and assistant director on these particular projects.
Yeah, it's a funny term. So on a lot of these projects, I kind of run a dual role, depending on how big and or small the project is. So I started sort of working as an assistant editor, which is really support in editorial, where you're handling rushes, you're doing syncing, you're helping with playouts. That's probably the very basic building blocks of what the job entails. And there's other things like helping out the editor. Sometimes they'll ask you in to sort of like look at cuts and just sort of run a second set of eyes over things. And then in the last couple of years, I've moved more towards the visual effects side. So it's always been around, but it's only now that with software and budgets expanding and things becoming much more accessible, that a lot of shows are starting to incorporate visual effects, even down to the level where the budgets may not be super big. Like it's very difficult to find a television show in Australia these days that will not have some component of visual effects. And so what I do as the visual effects editor, we're responsible for basically collating and managing the amount of shots and providing the vendors with all the material and making sure that is all tracked. We're responsible for other things like bash comping. Bash comping is kind of where they have a green screen, and so we're going to do like a composite, a very simple composite. Like mostly we try to do it within the editing software with the tools available. But if you wish to sort of go a high level, you can what we call break it out of the chain and bring it into another external program like After Effects or something. But generally we try, I personally like to try and achieve it within the editing software that we use called Avid, because it just makes it a little bit easier to unpack when we're turning this over, which means preparing it for the vendors to know exactly what went into creating that bash comp so that we're not missing any elements, clean plates, etc., things like that.
Oh, it sounds like super technical.
No, it's not. It's not.
It actually sounds very, very niche.
Yes, it is.
And
yeah.
it's also, and it can be very unfamiliar to some of our listeners, and especially because not every production has a VFX editor.
Yes, yeah.
As a VFX editor, what is your typical day like? Especially on these big productions like Mortal Kombat and Interceptor and so on.
Well, it really depends on at what stage you're brought in to production, and every single production is pretty different. If you're lucky and on a production that can afford your services to start earlier, I think there's always a benefit to have people on from as soon as possible in any production. This includes things like, the composer or the VFX team or post supervisors, etc. The more earlier you can bring them on in the conveyor belt, the smoother it will run towards the end of the production. So where I've been able to start during the shoot, my day will normally consist of tracking the visual effects components that come in, because if it's a very VFX heavy film, they will shoot specific things that may not necessarily make it on screen, but are very significant components of being able to complete the shot. And those things include, like a clean plate, because there's wire removals, or plates from another scene that are going to fit into the green screen background, and they may be from two different locations. And so my job will be collating all of that so that later, when they're looking for things that are going to fit the angle that's been chosen, I'm able to bring that up at speed and make sure that everything sort of matches. You're looking for changes. And also, when you do watch the rushes, you are monitoring for things that might be useful later as well. They may not have been necessarily specifically shot, but you go, oh, I could use that. So let's make sure that we have that as reference somewhere. So a lot of it is what I call sort of like tagging and bagging. And it really is quite varied, because I won't say it's a new kind of role, because it has been around a while. But I think within, say, the last 15 years, it has really kind of exploded in a way. And I was very, very fortunate to kind of get in a little bit early in terms of on the Australian scene. So that was pretty lucky for me.
So let's unpack that a little bit, right? Because you went from, how did you even get into this role?
I don't really know where to start, like where to start from when I decided to go for it. I was working in the hospital in Singapore at Kadang Kabal, and I wanted to do a couple of things as an expat to sort of get to know the local area, like either play an instrument, join a sport, or just do a hobby. And so I applied at the time, and this was a long, long time ago when they had TCS up on Caldecott Hill. They did some open auditions. And so I went to these auditions, and that eventually led to me doing support cast work on Singapore TV shows and stuff. And that's where I got interested. So I thought I'd make the jump, and I came back to Australia and applied for certain schools. I'm not too sure if I've answered that quite right. It really depends on how far back you kind of want to go.
When did you come here, by the way?
I came in 1997. So I'd finished uni. I'd done my honours down in my home state of Tasmania, which is a small state in Australia. And I really wanted to use my degree. And because I come from a small place, I thought cities like Melbourne and Sydney were quite foreign to me. And I was a little bit scared, to be honest. So I thought, well, if I'm going to move for work, I might as well just move countries. Let's make it worth the while. So we had a couple of Singaporean students in the course that I did. My uni course was biomedical science, and I contacted them, and they said, look, you're in luck. We're hiring. So come on over and talk to our boss. I used to work at KK Hospital. I was in the microbiology department, which I love. I love microbiology. So I was dealing specifically with bacteria. It's not the most glamorous of roles, because you're dealing with a lot of, shall we say, bodily fluids, testing and stuff like that. I look back extremely fondly of my time in Singapore, and hopefully not through a romanticized lens, but from a practical lens. And, there's a lot of stuff that happened to me in Singapore, which was part of forming who I am today, because it was a good part of my 20s, basically.
Wow. Okay, that's a huge journey that you went on. Biomedical science, right?
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. If I really recommend, if you want to get into the film industry, not to start with a biomedical science degree. It probably takes you a bit longer. But in saying that, I still love the science. I really do. At the time that I made the switch, it was a matter of I enjoyed the science, but I was also starting to get an interest in the creative arts, and it was a matter of I like both, but I feel more passionate about one, so why not? I can talk underwater with a meat pie in my mouth, like the right topics. I can go on all day, and it's, to be honest, like, it's really lovely to connect with the Singapore side again. I tell you, like, the Number one, without a doubt, is the supper culture in Singapore. I miss it. I miss it so much. In Australia, we don't have supper culture. I miss the fact that, back in the day when I used to go to the club, you go to Zouk, and then like 1 or 2 in the morning, you're eating, and then you get the phone calls start coming. Hey, where are you? Where are you? Okay, we're down here. We're Ben Coolen. Okay, come. We're le packing with the kakis, and the kaki culture. Having your friends just come and join the table, and it doesn't matter, just, oh yeah, we'll be in a cab and we'll see you soon. I miss that. It's the single most important thing I feel is missing in my life right now. That supper and kaki culture really goes a long way in defining your society. I miss that about Singapore a lot. I love the fact that I could just take off, and I've done it. Like, I get a phone call from a friend at 1 a.m. I got on my motorcycle. I got my motorcycle license at SSDC, Ang Mo Kio. I was local, man. And that was one of the best things I did, was that I was able, the motorcycle opened up Singapore to me. And particularly when we were doing things like shooting in different locations, I was able to get on the bike and just go, and also friends. So that was one of the biggest and best things that I really enjoyed about Singapore, was just being able to, one, be able to sort of travel across the island, 2, meet up with people at certain eating places. Single-handedly, and this is probably across Asia as well, the supper culture and the fact that friends will come around at 1 a.m. and then my cousin will just sort of like break out the air fryer and put in the salted pork, or someone will go get some hot food and bring it back. And then they will, like makan around the table and just relax, and of course drinks, because oh my goodness. And I think that's the biggest sort of like the most lovely cohesive sort of act that you can have in Singapore. It is a real credit to both the country and the culture in Asia. I miss it incredibly. I cannot understate that enough, or can't overstate that enough. I miss that a lot. Too much. And you all know it. You know it as Singaporeans. You're all talking about the memories at like, was it S11 or S22? What was the one near
S11.
S11, is right? S11, yes.
No, where was the one where was the one near the Fat Frog? Which I think the substation's no more, right? I tell you what, as a trivia story, when I came back to Singapore one time, because I used to work at KK Hospital, sometimes for lunch we catch the bus up to Newton Circus, and I went back years later, and then I saw this guy, right? I used to eat the soup kambing. I used to love the soup. It's like heart attack in a bowl. So yes. I went to go and I saw this guy and I said, "You look very familiar." And he said, and he remembered me. And years after me being there, and he was saying, and it was hard for me to place the stall because they had refurbished and sort of like done new buildings and stuff. And he said, "Oh yeah, I remember you. You walked down the road." And I was like, "Hey, how are you?" And he told me, "Yeah, my father passed away." So we were able to sort of like reconnect. And I tell you what, though, I miss the Singapore food a lot. My goodness.
Come back.
I know, like the first, in fact, like it's been a tradition every time I come to Singapore, I go straight from the airport to go eat cheese prata. Like I don't even go unpack. It's like, no, we're going to the stall and we're going to eat straight away. I have to. I do miss my time in Singapore a lot. Actually, it's rewarded me with sort of like what I have today, and also friendships that last till today. Like I've met up with Keegan a couple of times. He's been back in Australia at certain times. Other visiting Singaporeans sort of like come down, and then when I go back, obviously, there's a lot of people. In fact, it's not like a holiday when I go back, because I literally have to try and catch up with everyone.
All of these meetings.
or what happened, I think last time I was there, Sean was part of this story. I was flying out to New York and out of Singapore, and somehow I completely and utterly screwed up the dates. And I happened to be trying to check in 48 hours early, going, "Oh, this is great. I'll just check in and forget about it." And then I realized my flight was in 3 hours. I totally messed it up. And I put on Facebook, I was just like, oh, can anyone help me? And Sean was kind enough to actually come and pick me up and take me to the airport. I was such an idiot.
Oh,
And
that's
I
so nice.
almost missed my flight. I got there, though. I got there in the end.
Wow, Sean, you're the lifesaver.
Feel like I've kind of made friends for life after the experience. It was a really, really fun experience, to be honest. And that sowed the seeds of really sort of me kind of pushing me over the edge in terms of what I wanted to do, where I felt I wanted to go. I was always sort of like quite drawn to the creative industries, even though I come from a scientific background. I like like to straddle both.
Talk us through that transition then. So after that, if something was sparked after doing something like a
Exactly.
hobby, right? You were in front of the camera. So why did you go back in the first place? You know, you went back to Australia, right?
Yeah, I went back specifically to pursue getting into the film and television industry. I felt at that stage that my best part, let's say, sort of like support that I could receive in trying to achieve that would be in Australia, because in Australia we have a lot of there's a lot of sort of government help in terms of studying, etc. You can receive allowance. Also, I would not be paying, say, international fees, because I had considered trying to apply to Singapore, but then as a foreigner, I would be subject to fees which I probably could not afford. Whereas in Australia, my fees were literally negligible, or there is a sort of like a pay later system as well if you do it through a university. So that formed a big part of me going back. One, the support. Two, I felt the quality of education would be quite good depending on the school. There are a couple of schools in Australia which have quite a good reputation and have some very serious alumni that have come out of there. So at the end of my contract, so I was in Singapore, well, I was at the hospital for about 4 years. I decided I really wanted to make a go of it. So I said I wasn't going to renew. I went on holiday, and on that holiday to Europe, I started applying for schools in Australia. Unfortunately, I didn't get into the schools that I applied for. So I went back to my home state and found that they had a small TAFE. TAFE in Australia is kind of like a vocational college, if you will. And so the fees were very cheap, and I started off with that. And then I did that for a year, and then I literally started applying, not even applying for jobs. I just started blasting companies. There's a particular directory in Australia that has a listing of people that choose to have their production company in there. And I approached it like a military operation. I was like, right, where does stuff get made in Australia? Okay, Sydney looks good. And then like, what are the production houses in Sydney? I had no idea what they did. I had no idea what I was doing. I had my Excel spreadsheet of whom I had written to, whether or not I'd got a response. And I was just so lucky that one of the guys asked me up for an interview in Sydney. And it was, I had to approach that with a bit of tactic for the interview, because I was older, and at the time I'm applying for a junior avid editor position at the age of like 32, 33. Now that's pretty late to be starting.
And your experience prior to that was, of course, MediaCorp acting and
totally
checking
unrelated, basically.
and studying, and studying bacteria in the lab, and
exactly. So that's why I approached it with. My approach was to think forward and say, right, what are the things that this potential employer is going to be looking at that would essentially erase me from the job? My age, my background, education. And so I would come up with answers for all of that, and was just brutally honest as well. And I said, listen, I gave up a career to apply for your job, which means that if you hire me, I want to do this. I'm not some young punk coming out of school that has got the eye out the window looking for another job. And I believe that resonated with him when I was, very honest. And I said things like, listen, I don't know everything, but if you point me in the direction, I'll know it in 5 minutes. I will find an answer. So in the end, he did hire me, and I'm forever grateful for that guy. And he actually told me, I don't know whether it's compliment or insult, but he said, you weren't the best qualified, but I like your attitude. So And then here we are today.
Well, I would have to say, like, now that we're looking for people for other projects as well, that's entirely like a full-on compliment, because that's the hardest thing that you can find in any candidate that you are searching for, right?
I'm thinking about attitude in general is everything, isn't it?
Absolutely.
I would say
100%. You know what? I've never known, I was just saying this to my wife today, I've never known an industry where there is an entire other industry about getting into the industry. There are film schools, there's acting courses, there's, you know what I mean? It's weird, right?
That's true.
It's weird.
That's
There's a whole,
true.
that's the industry amongst it on its own. Even like, you know, if I come over and talk to you, like, man, what you see is what you get. Like, I'm pretty honest. Like, I abhor bullshit. A lot of the people in the film industry here also hate bullshit. Like, you know, like, and again, the attitude, like, you don't want to get some self-entitled film school student. Not that there's anything wrong with film school, it's fine. But you don't want to get someone feeling self-entitled going, well, I did this, so now you owe me this. It's like, no. Here's where the real deal is. A lot of people are like, well, I've got this. And I know in Singapore as well, it's really, there's so much emphasis placed upon the fact that you have a certain qualification. And I think it came up in Singapore news recently. Someone was saying, like, you know, if Thelonious Monk or whatever musician was asked to lecture, they couldn't do it because they don't have a PhD, but they've got the life experience. They've got the experience.
Crazy.
So where does industry experience count in terms of like the person that's got like a master's in it? Like, okay, then you're almost like learning for the sake of learning. Whereas I feel lucky enough to have come up through learning on the job. And like, I think we're in one of the not last, I wouldn't say that, but we're in one of the industries where we can say like learning on the job is so important. And you guys know it. Like, yes, it is good to go to school, but it has to be backed up with practical application of that knowledge.
Yeah, the actual experience of it.
I know. Yes, I mean, not to say that film school, acting school is not important. I think that it has its value, but you're absolutely right. I think that because there is a whole industry about getting the industry, and but the reverse is not true, right? If those people went to school in like what we were saying, those people went to school in film and so on are not able to do what you did as far, you know, in microbiology and so on, but it worked for you to come in.
I have to come back to attitude, actually. I think, and this is only in my experience, other people will definitely sort of like have a different lens on it. But I think attitude is key, because even when I've been trying to hire staff or look for staff, I feel like you can't teach somebody that doesn't want to learn. And a lot of the work, it can be learned, and we understand that, and we've all been there. And it just takes the right attitude to someone who's very keen. And I think it's hugely underrated how important attitude is. I often tell people I don't feel that I'm the most technically proficient person. You know, even before we started recording, I'm talking about headphones and stuff. I couldn't get, you know, but I'm not a dick.
If you had a great attitude, you can work 14 hours a day with a smile on your face, day in and day out. At the end of the 14-hour day, still remain civilized and treat people well. I think that's the key. But it's easier said than done, right? Because, you know, you see, I've seen people that are talented. They are incredibly nice. But after, and, you know, they're all great, they're all great and great relationships and all that. But then at the end, you know, it just falls flat on your face because, you know, of grumpiness. So I think besides attitude, Daniel, what does you think it's also very important, you know, to keep going in this industry for as long as you have?
If I had to give any advice to people in the industry, just don't be a dick. No one likes it. The reason for that is very simple. When you're working, as you guys know, very long hours, there is a lot of pressure. You're going to have moments where you have to be able to know that the person in the room next to you or in the chair next to you has got your back and can handle the fact that maybe you'll blow up and have a swear, but it's not personal. It's you know, it's just a little bit of a vent, and you can psychologically get through it together. You do not want to be spending 6 months to 12 months to 18 months with someone you cannot stand. You really...
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
It's like pure torture.
And I just want to confirm, like, this is not about being fake, okay? Because people can pick that, particularly Like, we work in post and editing, so we're looking at performance all day. Like, we're looking at stuff whether it's real to you, and so like, yeah, if you're very fake about it, people can see through that as well. So if you get a good vibe of someone, that's really important. And it's really important because to be able to, I'm not going to say you don't want to be so compliant that you take abuse, but you want to be able to be generous enough to know that, okay, maybe someone's having a bad day, and take that on your shoulders as well. The way I like to look at it is that, listen, we're all brothers and sisters. And sometimes a family can fight, but at the end of the day, we're still family. So that's very important.
On that note of, you a lot of your point of, spending time with people and so on, a lot of your projects, you did the same show for, a year or more, right? And I think plus you've got the luxury of time on these high profile projects. And I think a lot of people picture you editors and directors as well, especially those working in Hollywood feature films, to be sitting in air-conditioned rooms, having coffee and croissants all day, or having coffee, maybe, or maybe beer and gin if the day goes the other way around. But is that really the experience then,
No.
working at these Hollywood productions?
No, absolutely not. That's not to say there aren't nice moments, and they do. There are times where they do try to make it comfortable, but it's a lot of grinding, I notice. And to be honest, I do not know how directors do it sometimes, because their time is literally just go from the moment they wake up to the morning. There's always a decision to be made. I mean, Sean, I know you probably know this personally. Like, there's always something. So it's not. It's quite funny. There always seems to be a perception sometimes of what working on a major motion picture or a film is like. There's the image of the director in the leather jacket and a beret and a briefcase or whatever, and I can tell you that's definitely not the case. Some of the biggest people I've worked with, sort of like are dressed very casually in fleece sweaters, sneakers, because you are in the room all the time and you have to be comfortable. I mean, the only person I can say that's probably, Baz. Baz is super fashionable. He's always on in that sense. I don't think he sort of leaves the house without looking
It's
pretty
a
good.
personal style, right? Yeah,
he's very stylish, I have to admit. And as is his partner, CM Catherine Martin, she's impeccable. They're both very lovely.
So Daniel, you have opened up this conversation topic because you worked on Great Gatsby.
Yes. Yeah.
So what did you do? What did you do on Great Gatsby, and what was it like to edit with or for somebody like Baz Luhrmann?
Well, Great Gatsby was actually my very first sort of major, I would say, studio picture. So my goal when I started was that I really wanted to work on what I would call a Hollywood film. And Gatsby was being filmed in Australia, but it was being funded by Warner Brothers. I was a VFX assistant editor on that particular film, and it was, I have to admit, I found it a huge learning experience, as you can imagine, sort of coming in, not really knowing enough, but really not knowing. Sometimes
it's a whole different world.
It's
right?
a whole different world. It's like you don't know enough to know that you don't know until you encounter it.
I know how that feels.
It was good, and in terms of the working hours, it was pretty brutal. We've chatted before about working hours. So the contract, we were contracted to 60-hour weeks minimum. So it would be 8 to 8:30 every day, Monday to Friday. And it would always run longer and stuff. And I was lucky enough to be on from the first day of shoot to the very end. So that was a hugely, really rewarding experience. I firmly believe that sort of set me up in terms of knowledge and experience that has carried me through to where I am today. It was good. And I met some wonderful people, the editors and the editorial team. We worked during shoot. We were based at Fox Studios. It was a real thrill for me because I think it was about 2011 they were shooting. I reversed time a little bit and I'm watching Romeo and Juliet in my home country. Fast forward and I'm on set watching Baz and Leo converse and talk and Baz directing him I
can
it's
imagine.
it's a pinch me moment, where you're just like, oh wow, how did I end up here? And but to be honest, I was actually the most excited was I saw Amitabh Bachchan sitting in the chair. I wanted to be like that kid on Slumdog Millionaires, Amitabh Bachchan. I really wanted to go say hello, but I didn't dare. It was my first big job. I didn't want to get fired, or I didn't know how that kind of stuff worked. It was very tough in terms of the working hours and making things happen, but it was also very rewarding. We then moved post. We were working in a building that Baz owned, which was right next to his house. So he would sort of like come down and sort of walk through the secret door. Oh, secret door is just a door in the fence. And
in Australia?
Sometimes, it was all in Sydney. And then, sometimes we'd all be working hard, so we'd put on some drinks at his house on a Friday night and stuff and converse. It was really cool in that sense that he's a bit of a legend of the Australian film industry and, sort of worldwide with what he's achieved. So to be able to sort of work and see that kind of process up front was really good. Baz was actually very generous in terms of opening up certain scenes or cuts to post-discussion with people. We'd have screenings downstairs. We had a projector sort of room set up downstairs, which could handle sort of like 3D. Sometimes for milestone cuts, we'd have a screening just before like we were to present as the studio and stuff. And he was very open in terms of hearing things from the team, which was really lovely. And I think, the editors did such a really good job in being able to sort of realize what his sort of like vision. It was very, very interesting time to see that up close, to really see it go through, and even meet like sort of like studio execs. They would come down as well and get a feeling of how the system works.
And this was all in his house.
It was all next door. It was all next door to his house.
If you want a barometer if you're cool, Daniel, if you really need a barometer if you're cool, uncle, you just show up at Baz Luhrmann's house since you know where he lives, and you go, yo, Baz, EJ. And then you see if he opens his door for you and go like, yo, Daniel, and you go in there for all that.
He's moved now. It
must be a bit strange to be like, I'm working next door, like in the building that my boss was at. It's like prison. I can't leave, right?
Yeah, it was.
It's like I better not leave. He's just right there.
He's right next door. He might pop down any time. But I look back on that time fondly. But the reality of the hours as well is that it can be. You have to be kind of prepared for that. And I remember, Sean, you've said before, like, of course, we've all done very long shifts. Everybody's done it, but I liken it very much to the put your arm in the air test. If I ask you to put your arm in the air, hey, no problem. Okay, hold it there for a week and see how you feel after that. So you have to be very, very careful. And I think it's not that just that production, but any production really, that you take the time to look after yourself. And this is kind of a feeling that I've sort of been moving towards and feel more stronger as I sort of make my way through jobs, in that we have to be very careful as individuals to make sure that we have a balance. Particularly, I'm a father now. I have young kids. I want to be able to see them. I want to be able to pursue my hobbies,
So I'm just wondering, for you as a personal preference, is there a difference, or would you prefer one over the other? The smaller projects.
That's a good question. That's a good question.
Or the bigger one, there's the glamour. The system is different as well.
And if you look at your body of work, what I've noticed is that you've gone from like Interceptor, which is on Netflix now, you went from Mortal Kombat to Peter Rabbit 2. It's completely diverse genres as well. It's like I went from RA and fatalities to little rabbits.
I know it's quite odd. Like I made the joke before that. Oh my gosh, I've never worked on a show where the CG creatures are talking to you. They normally just try to kill you or rip your head off. Now they're actually conversing and saying funny things. It's good. I think I think generally in Australia, I've been lucky enough to be able to be offered interesting projects, and also the reality is that yes, there is stuff coming through, but also sometimes there may not be stuff coming through. And if you are freelancing, that's a very important thing. Where do you balance, say, your financial responsibilities to yourself and your family versus what you might feel to be, artistic integrity, etc. There is a very practical aspect to it as well. I went from doing the action film of Interceptor, and now I'm working on a very nice television show for Amazon. I'm really enjoying, and it's a different pace. And I think in that sense, I always try to look for something in every job that, one, I enjoy, two, I learn. I've got to learn something on every show. Otherwise, I don't want to be feeling like I'm doing the same thing. And essentially, you are hired to do a role, but there's always something in order to be sort of fulfilled with that. I think it's important, again, attitude on how you look at something. Like, I think it's really important that I described to you about, say, as an assistant editor doing rushes. Now, and this is what I say to people, some people will look at that role as just putting sound to vision, and that's all it will ever be for them. The practical, mechanical thing of putting sound to the clap, moving on. But for me, I'm interested in seeing how the building blocks are formed. And I'm in a very privileged position to see, one, we read the script. Two, we get to see the director's vision and the DOP sort of visually sort of interpret those words off the script. We then get to see the editor put it together. So you're not, if you want to look at it as just syncing sound to vision, fine, that's all you'll get out of it. But if you want to look at it from a different attitude, you can get so much more out of it. And it's really important. And that's in every job. It doesn't have to be film industry. If you really want to get fulfillment out of your job, then either get something that really appeals to you or try reworking your perspective a little bit.
How much of what you just said is sort of like stems from your background doing high-profile Australian television? I think Underbelly comes to mind, right? It's a very, very successful franchise, many, many seasons.
Actually, from my very first job in the Australian film industry was on a television show called McLeod's Daughters. And that's when I fell in love with just seeing the building blocks. It was some time ago. Yeah, it was actually a bit of trivia. It was the last Australian show to be fully shot on film. It was shot on 16mm film. So that was very interesting because a lot of people these days would never have the chance to touch actual celluloid. It's all digital. And that's when I really fell in love with it. Underbelly, every job has had a little bit of special thing. Underbelly was also special to me in the sense that it was a very popular franchise at the time. I was able to meet some really nice people on it. And I think you'll notice, like, I keep coming back to say that one of the highlights are the people. And it really is. In Sydney, at least, like there's a small but not small post community. And I feel like there are some real gems of people that you really want to keep coming back to work with. Funnily enough, on this particular show I'm working on now is the first time that I've worked with one of the editors since Underbelly, and even though we're by remote because we're all sort of online and stuff, but it was a thrill just to be able to sort of like be on a project with her again because I have so much respect. She's really good. Actually, one of the directors has done some work in Singapore, Tony Tills. I met Tony on the Underbelly series and stuff. At the time, we had a post supervisor that would bring in a round table. And one of the lovely things about it, that as the post crew, we'd all get lunches and we'd all eat together. And those were the times where, like, I'd have Tony next to me. I could ask him questions about directing. It's such a lovely, informal way to learn about storytelling. Once again, framing your job in a different perspective, I'm able to learn about storytelling. It's like getting paid to go to film school, but you're actually making the stuff, which sounds a bit of the, learning on the job, but at the same time, like, it's it's really great education.
Yeah, but I think I like the attitude of the attitude of always learning on the job. Like you're never at the peak. You are always learning something new, no matter which project you're on, no matter how many times you've done a certain task before, right? There's always something to
Absolutely.
be learned from it.
There's the mechanical side of it where the technology is always improving. So you have to keep up by default. The other side, say the artistic side, which I have a lot of affection for, is being able to talk to different directors and editors about how they've interpreted. Like, for example, not just putting the building blocks together, but obviously they go through many iterations and the story gets discussed. And I'm literally in the front seat being able to talk to these very experienced people and say, hey, why did you remove that? Why did that? And they're going, well, we'd already covered that emotional point with this scene before. So we decided to remove it. So you actually get to hone your storytelling skills or gain an insight into it, which is really lovely. And also I've talked to mosquitoes. I've talked to directors about how do you block a scene? Like I've always been very curious, like where do you start? And I'm able to do that on the job, which is great.
Is there some kind of formula or template you feel you've noticed after having done a heap of episodic television?
I think when it depends on the television. I think if you're doing something like a soap opera, there's definitely it's because it's shooting on a soap is very fast paced. So like you probably see the directors maybe will rock off a wide cross shoot. For those who don't cross shoot, having two cameras, so you're able to sort of like get both actors' coverage at the same time, be it in studio or on location. But in terms of the editing, I don't believe that there is a formula. I think most editors will tell you that what you're doing is trying to serve the story as to serve what you might call as the aesthetic or the look. First and foremost is serving the story, and does the story work, and where is the directed attention meant to focus? As a lot of people will probably tell you, like you could have beautiful pictures, but if the script is not good, nothing is saving that. But yet you shoot something on a budget, but the story is so good, people are going to connect with that. And there are lots of indie films that have come out of that where people just go, wow, look, you can do it. But you have to have a good story. And I think in that sense, first and foremost, an editor and director are always going to serve the story. Of course, I'm talking maybe not from an experience point of view where I'm handling myself with a director, but this is just something that I've observed in the cutting room.
And on that note of editing, we can do that for you when you make cool content with us on the Uncool podcast.
That's right. Sponsorship and collaboration opportunities are available, so drop us an email at CreativesAtWork.asia to find out more.
I know we're talking about between the practicality as well as what you have brought on a lot. It's really the passion and your attitude and your thirst to learn, right? But let me bring this back a little bit to that point when you were transitioning, right, from something entirely different to what you're doing right now. I think your passion, can I say it was a driving force at that point of time?
Yeah, no, 100%. I think nobody gets in the film industry for money, that's for sure. There is.
But how much of those actions that you chose, right? I know you went back to Australia to study because of very practical reasons. But then when you came out to work, especially in the VFX industry, how much
I can't believe you said VHS. Oh my god.
I think I said VFX industry. When you came out into that and that rush, that very military style that you approached it, how much of it was driven by that passion? But how much was like
100% driven by passion, because I had given up essentially, which was a whole different career, and that was a career in pathology. And I remember a friend saying to me, like, why are you doing this? You have such a good job. Like, aren't you worried? And my answer was, look, I'm 28 at the time. Let's just say, my attitude was, let's just say we retire at arbitrary figure 65. Are you trying to tell me that by giving this chance, pursuing this shot, I cannot get a job between the ages of, say, 28 and 65. That's statistically impossible. That doesn't even make sense. So when you reframe it and look at it from a different perspective, the difficulties don't seem as insurmountable as what society projects on you. And I think you can both, a lot of Singaporeans probably come across this same type of attitude, which we had in my hometown, because I'm from a smaller place in Australia, where is the general life journey path that you go down is primary school, high school, university, get a job, find a partner, get married, have 2.5 children, buy a couch and a dog. That's literally like what was drained almost by de facto, sort of like you absorb that. And by following your passion, yes, it's very important. I like to temper that with, sort of a practical approach as well. So I had given myself a time frame. I said, listen, if it doesn't work, I'll give myself 3 years. If it doesn't work, I'll apply for jobs in the hospital back in my home country and try to go on from there. But 100%, I was very, very driven. Very, very driven because I was also older. I'm literally competing against the new wave of people coming out of film schools, and it's so common now. So I really had to light a fire, because it was like, if I didn't do it now, then when is it going to happen? And I don't particularly want to get to the end of my life and not have at least tried the things that I do that I want to do. I'll be very happy to try and fail rather than go, geez, I wish. I mean, I just, for me personally, I find that very difficult.
But in a way, you had less to lose than the younger person, right? I mean, in the sense that if it did work out for you, there will always be gonorrhea and bacteria for you to study.
Yeah, you sort of had your backup already, right?
But the reverse, the younger guy cannot do what you do. The younger guy can't go and cook and study all that bacteria.
That's true.
So, there will always be bacteria even when you're 65.
They might.
It's true.
But talking about your more recent work, I'm just wondering, because you worked on your very recent jobs like Interceptor, Mortal Kombat, and so on. Obviously, Peter Rabbit 2, of course, obviously very, very different in terms of cuteness. They're cute in different ways. But how does it feel that you'd be spending 12 months or more dealing with fatalities day in and day out? How does it affect your psyche?
No, it's all pretty good. I think when you approach everything like the editors and directors are sort of working towards the best form of the material that they can present. So even though the building blocks are still essentially the same, the rearrangement, the final if you liken it to, say, like you have bricks. Now, out of those bricks, you can build a house that looks a certain way, or you can build a house that looks another way. And they're constantly trying to find what works best for that particular space or building blocks. So in that sense, it's always interesting. It's always interesting. One of my favorite parts of all time is when you're working in VFX and the shots start coming back just before final completion. It's magic. For example, on Peter Rabbit, we'd work. The editors would work with, or the editor would work with storyboards. So you would see something go from. They had a team that would storyboard the action and positioning based on frames that were exported out of the Avid, so that they could actually do it to frame. And then when they were imported into the Avid, they could be cut on top of the live action to where the rabbit should be placed, etc. And then we would take that and we would send out reference and the materials. And then you'd start to see these little grey rabbits come back, very odd, sort of like, stand-in things and what have you. And then you see the expressions. And then when you see the final lighting and comp and it's magical on any film, to be honest. In Mortal Kombat, when you see, like a grayscale, there was one character called Goro. I'm not sure if you're familiar. He's got 4 arms.
The 4 arms.
So you kind of go from they literally had two stunt guys, one on top of each other, dressed in blue, with a funny-looking blue hat and two eyes for the eye line, sort of going like this. So you have that in for ages, and it just looks really strange. And then the grayscale comes in, and then the textures come in, and it's just when you finally get it all put together, it's really a lovely moment. And it's the kind of moment where you call the other guys around, hey, look what they sent through. And I don't ever want to lose that excitement because I still love it. It's great. We like there's a scene where this character called Natara, one of the bad guys, one of Chin Han's posse, and she sort of flies down, and for those of you that might not have seen the show, she sort of dies a very violent death, and that was one of the more later shots to be completed. And then when we saw it come in, we were just like on the floor, like just it was cool. It was really, really cool.
Is there a lot of expectation because with a franchise filmmaking, right? And like in the case of Mortal Kombat, there's all this history, right? There's the video games, there's all these past films and all that. So how does all the expectation and from the other material as well like affect all these building blocks that you're talking about?
I think that's an interesting question. I think that's something that I'm not sort of like involved in on the creative level. It's more for the director and editors, VFX supervisors, the people that help build the world in terms of the direction that they want to take it. It's interesting, though, you would think sometimes on, say, a major film that a lot of it is thought out beforehand, which it is, but there also seems to be an allowance during the post-production period where there will be a lot of options and things tried to try and again get the best result, or story elements introduced. There's also something which only really happens on say sort of bigger budget films is the audience testing. So there will be a period where there's literally, I think there's a particular mall or something in the States where people hang out and say, hey, you want to see a film? You want to see a film? And they sign an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement, and they will go and then they have to fill out the questionnaire. So sometimes there'll be a lot of movement in how the story is presented just based on certain things. Did they like this character? Did they not like this character? Was there anything confusing about it? And that's not normally an opportunity that's afforded, say, sort of like a lower budget production, but it can be absolutely useful in terms of trying to move the final product towards something that is accessible to either a majority or confirm what they were trying to go for in the first place. More often than not, sometimes on the visual effects editor, you will join post after shoot, and then you kind of have to hit the ground running. You're able to sort of like see things a little bit differently as well. So it's certainly really interesting. I love post. I love the sort of amalgamation of all things picture and sound, and also just one of the things, sort of answering little mystery questions in my own mind about like what makes something good, like score. When the score comes in and the directors will be listening and you'll hear their comments and you go, oh, I wonder why they feel that. Also, another sort of like privilege I've had to do is I've been able to do is ask editors about performance. Now, performance is interesting because everyone has got an idea of whether or not, like some actors' performance I've really liked, but there may have been some comments that sort of different to my opinion. So that's a really interesting thing. Try and get your barometer sort of like going against what you feel works or doesn't work. I remember on one of the Underbelly series, I was able to sort of like call up my experience because the story happened was the scripts were still being finalized as we were shooting. And the art department had asked me, do you know any Asian teenagers? We need a picture of someone that we can just put on a police report. And I said, I just asked my brother to send me a picture. So he did. And then by the time we got round to filming the last episode, they had written the character in again. They were like, but we don't have anyone to play this. I said, well, the picture was my brother. Why don't I just play it? It's just one line. And everyone agreed. Like, and that was when Tony was working on that episode. He was very nice to me. I went down and shot, and I'd finished, and it was like, oh, clap for Dan, which I thought was really lovely. But I remember, like, I had one line. I'm like, how can I get the maximum edit time possible? So I split the line. I put a pause in the middle of it. I sort of delivered one back here, and then I purposely leaned forward so the continuity wouldn't match, so that they would have to come back to it at some stage. Yeah.
But you went from like in front of the screen to behind the screen, right? And was that a conscious choice? You could,
Oh,
you
100%.
got in love with film, right?
Knowing my limits is probably like, I'm not a very good actor. Although, look, don't get me wrong, I enjoyed it. I really loved it, because just to be able to experience that in my life, it was a very lovely thing. But from an artistic standpoint, in terms of where I wanted to go, I believe that when it comes to narrative and it comes to stories, the actor will act as a vessel. So what they display will be, the story will flow through them, and it will come out as emotion and delivery. Whereas if you are a director or an editor, you are able to be more like a conductor, where you're able to control the level of volume of, say, the violins on this section, or the percussion section over here. So it's more kind of like molding. And I found that hugely appealing, and I really wanted to be a director and make films. I find that much more appealing than acting. Even though, like, I liked it, it was fun, and I like sort of getting out of my own skin. But that was what was appealing to me.
So you're obviously very, very passionate about editing, goes without saying. But so what excites you the most, though, of all the things that editors do? What excites you the most?
The biggest thrill is always seeing what you end up with from what you had. And unfortunately, for a lot of people, they don't get to experience that, because I tell you, some editors and directors working together are absolutely magicians in terms of sort of like just honing that story and then that narrative into what you see. It's almost like, some of them are really, really, really good at their craft. Sort of like things that I like to see, I guess, sort of like a form of narrative that you may not have seen before, or from maybe a visual point of view, maybe something where the angles are really different. You know it in your heart, I feel, unconsciously, when you watch something and it works and you really like it. Now, sort of working in the industry, I'm able to kind of vocalize or being able to sort of attribute certain things to, I know why that works now. So I think, to me, like, seeing something, or just seeing something real. Sometimes some of my real favorite things are like indie stuff. Like, I really love Jon Favreau's first film, Swingers. Like, it's just a small, tiny film. Him and Vince Vaughn as in LA, sort of like based on his life. It's a really good film. And then I like seeing something like Iron Man or something. Well, Jon Favreau directed that, and I really like him. Or also, I think film festivals are really important in the sense, like foreign films, because I might not necessarily, it's going to sound a bit strange, but I may not necessarily like have enjoyed a particular film. I just went along to really see. If I enjoyed it, it was a bonus. If not, then I was able to sort of see a different type of storytelling, if that makes sense. Like, it's really interesting. I've seen a lot of sort of like foreign films like that.
I think that's the exciting part about international film.
Yeah, absolutely. Right? I still try to do my best to keep track of what's happening in Singapore, though it's been a very long time since I've been back. Like I said, I still have a lot of affection, I think, for the industry there. And it would literally be my dream to come back and do something in Singapore sometime.
You started out working on a 60mm film, and then, of course, you're moving on to digital and so on. So on that note, then, how do you see the future of editing changing over the next few years?
I don't know about the next few years, but I think technology-wise, I feel the cloud is approaching. I feel the cloud is. There are certain systems out there now. Nothing obviously beats being in the room with someone. With COVID sort of like showing us that things are possible by remote. I see that essentially editor could be in Los Angeles, the director is shooting, the rushes are coming back, sort of like live, or they're being processed and uploaded to the cloud. You're editing with like lower res stuff. It's the speeds are getting better. So that's where I sort of like see it happening. You're essentially being able to open up the world at one time. Then it's just managing sort of time frames. Like we had on Peter Rabbit 2, the director was in Australia for a bit, but he was also had to go over to America for a little bit, and he was able to sort of like do stuff from his home, where we set up sort of like a camera and a feed straight out of the Avid. Avid being the editing software, so basically out of the Avid's computers, and then you will just log into the app and watch it live. So essentially, and then have the camera and the feedback thing here, so that essentially you're watching what the editor's doing, and then the camera is like you're sitting in the room. So the importance of proximity, although it's probably the first choice, may sort of like give way to a little bit more sort of like distance-based work collaborations.
I mean, like us, we used to do the podcast in the room as well. And then now we're like, hi, Daniel, all the way from Australia.
yeah. Which is great. Like, it's fantastic.
And whatever you just described, it means that the image we have of the editor and the directors with coffee and croissants and that, well, now the coffee and croissants is your own in your own house.
It's the best. It's always the best.
It's not free from the studio anymore. Whoops. All this experience that you had, going from bacteria study to going to TAFE and editing all this TV and editing high profile feature films now. How has all this shaped your psychology towards life? Your personal life?
A lot of it has come out of the process in terms of, and that's another actually really good question, because I'm a huge advocate now of trying to find a way to work smart within the hours allotted, because we're all human, like this type of industry is very difficult on relationships. It's important to have a very good partner, an understanding partner. Like if you can imagine, when I mentioned before, we're starting at 8 a.m. and finishing at 8:30 at night. All your friends have literally finished, in Australia at least, finished eating and have gone home. No one's going to want to meet up. I would,
yes.
On the days where we went even later, start at 8 and I'd walk back to my girlfriend's house at 2 a.m. And then I'd get up and be at work by 8 again, because she happened to live nearby. I was too scared to kind of ride, because at that time you're actually in danger of having an accident because you're very tired. In terms of personal perspective, and also I'm a little bit older now. I'm a father, so a lot of that plays on my mind a lot. I feel that I have to try and do my best to prioritize my personal life. Although the requests, albeit friendly, they will come in. Oh, can you stay late? Can you do this? Which is fine, and we've all done that. But it has to be tempered against making sure that you're taking care of yourself. And that even can be really something simple, like make sure you eat. Make sure you don't eat at your desk. That was one of the first rules taught to me when I first started on McLeod's Daughters by the assistant. He just goes, never, ever eat at your desk. Just even if you take it over there, just go over there and eat, because you need to just have that mental separation. And it's very important. And also these days, which is really lovely, there's a lot of information and things around mental health. And I think that's really important. So that in myself, like, it's a high pressure industry. If you let it, you can be very anxious. I think one of the best sort of displays on screen that I've seen is that film, The Devil Wears Prada, where the character becomes so anxious and worked up over stuff which, in the world of Miranda Devine, was that the character, was very important, but in the real world, which was her father and stuff coming to visit, he was looking at her like going, are you crazy? Are you nuts? And she was saying things like, you don't understand. And sometimes I feel like it can get like that. And that's where working with the right team and the right people is really important, because they'll understand and they'll be able to support you through that. So in terms of philosophy, that's probably where I've developed now. When you're young, you do anything. You absolutely just like,
it's a yes attitude.
yes, can,
It's also because you're freelance, especially when you're a freelancer, right? I think you want to do everything, as you mentioned. You don't know. I mean, you need to manage your. I mean, every job that you say cannot do is sort of financial
Exactly.
implications to it, in a sense.
That's the thing.
So,
Yeah.
what is it like actually to be a freelancer?
It was actually a thing that took me a little while to get used to, because my nature is a person that would like to know where your next paycheck is coming from. So there had to be a mental sort of like there had to be a mental kind of like line in the sand where you just go, okay, if I want to make this a reality, I have to accept certain things. And then once you accept certain things, you feel a little bit more peaceful mentally in terms of, okay, I can move forward, and then therefore I can implement things that are going to help me achieve my goals. Like saving for a rainy day has been always there from day one, and that's just being disciplined with your money. That's there's an attitude which I like to call pay yourself. So when I first started, I was like, no matter what I do, I put this amount of money in an account, no matter what. And I'll make that every week. If I have stuff left over, great. I can do whatever I want. I can spend it on any frivolous thing, but I need to have that in the bank, because the rainy days, when I first started, I didn't know how long they might last. Luckily, I've had constant work since maybe 2018, so I'm fortunate. But before that, I was on a job where we literally were given a week's notice before the production went down. Something went awry, and we were all working. We were really chugging along. It was really cool. And then it was like, everyone down tools. And then we came back and we got the news that we weren't moving forward. So it's only happened once, but there is a chance that will happen. So in terms of managing that on a personal level, of anxiety and stuff, having the rainy day fun helps. And then freelancing in Sydney as well, it's a very interesting community, because when I first got into the industry, I answered an ad in like online or the paper maybe, which was for the McLeod's daughter's job. And ever since, that was 2008, and ever since then, I've never answered a job since. It's always approaching people through email, or I get a call, or I get an email. So being a freelancer, again, it comes back down to attitude as well. One guy told me on one job, which is very true: if you do a good job, people will hear about you. If you do a bad job, people will hear about you faster. So, yeah.
And if they don't hear about you, they're not going to give it a job anyway.
No.
So,
we're very lucky in the sense, like, the small but not small community is very generous. It's not as cutthroat as it is in Los Angeles, where you're trying to really sort of like get the job over the other person. So I've heard. I can't really claim too much experience there, although I have. I went over for a little bit on one film. But here in Australia, I feel we're very supportive of each other. If I can't do a job, I send them the emails of my mates that I know can do it, because at the end of the day, there will be enough work. And I would like to think that they do this. Maybe they don't. Maybe I'm an idiot. No one's recommending me to anyone. But I think that they are, or we'll have phone calls with each other and just say, hey, did this come across your plate? Or they're looking, or are you free? So a lot of the work now for freelancers sort of towards the end of a thing is like, I'm coming to an end of a job. I'll start putting out feelers. Does anyone know? People go, if I hear something, I'll throw your name. So we're constantly supporting each other in terms of like, hey, I'm not free, but this guy is good. Like, and it just kind of goes around. I don't want to think that we ever get into a situation where we're kind of like killing each other to try and get a job, because it's a bit
throwing at each other.
Yeah, I don't really like that attitude. I don't feel that there's any real necessity in terms of creating a good community and creating something. You don't want to mess with in your own rice bowl, really.
But as you said, if you do a bad job, people still hear about it faster.
Right?
So you get a lot of anxiety though when my phone doesn't ring, because you said you get a lot of jobs, my phone rings, your email. And if your phone doesn't ring for like 3 months, you're like, oh, what the heck?
Yeah, I haven't had that situation for a while. I've been very fortunate. Look, I'll say that. There is a level of anxiety, which I think, once again, I kind of mentioned that mental line in the sand where you just go, okay, I'm in. And so you are kind of being forewarned is forearmed against having that anxiety knocking at the door where you go, okay, I've accepted this. I have this much in the bank. I can make it happen. There are other things like I know you guys have sort of talked on other podcasts like about financial stuff, and it is a little difficult in terms of when we went for housing loan. You're dealing with banks, and banks are traditionally not very good at looking between the lines. Like freelancers, we're in a gray area. So I'm trying to explain to them oh, no, I work full time, but I work full time for the length of the television show or the film. And they're like, so you contract? I'm like, yes, I contract, but I don't contract as an independent contractor. You can, don't get me wrong, you can actually do that in Australia, but I work full time. I get the benefits that are afforded me through sort of like the general sort of like work agreements. I get paid my and we call it superannuation. You guys have CPF. So I would still get that. I would still get holiday pay, even though I can't take holidays. So,
but not bad. I think it's a lot more robust in the protection of freelancers over there in Australia. Then.
It's a lot better in Australia than I don't know what the situation's like in Singapore, but when I was there,
it's getting better.
I felt it's very difficult in Singapore. Like there's a lot more protections.
Well, whatever you describe, quite similar in a sense. I mean, I still have people who think I'm unemployed, and they're like, "Oh, yeah, so for 15 years." And literally, like when they do all these things that you're saying, like the bank forms, and they'll look at you and be like, "So, what exactly are you? Like an odd job labourer?"
Just give me the money. Just I'll be whatever. Yeah. That's quite difficult.
I had that. I had someone call me once as a census. This is because, the schools like to do that. And they're like, they want to find out what their graduates are doing, right? And so when I told them what I did, and the guy didn't know what to do at all, the person on the phone, she's like, so are you unemployed? I'm like, not exactly, no. So what, are you like an entrepreneur? I'm like, okay, if that makes you happy. And then she literally said, okay.
This is one of the things I found that I struggled with in Singapore. Not that we don't have it in Australia. We have that attitude too. But it's the attitude of, oh, it doesn't fit into my box. How do I make sense of this? And I find that attitude really difficult. If I can sort of like go off topic for a bit, my parents, my mum's a Eurasian from Malaysia, my father's Vietnamese. And when I went to Singapore, I felt that I would be sort of like a bit of a homecoming. I'd be amongst brothers and sisters, solidarity. But when I got to Singapore, on occasion, I would be met. I would be the Angmo, I'd be the Matsale, the Orang Putih, the Lawai, the Guailo, whatever. I had it all thrown in my face. And it was very difficult for me because, once again, if you don't fit into a particular box, people are more happy to sort of tell you where they feel you should fit. So you have to have a very strong sense, for me, culturally, of how I see myself. But to bring it back to where we're going in terms of profession and stuff, trying to smile and educate people as to what you do, because it's very difficult for some people to kind of figure out who you are.
It makes sense. And if you're listening to us on Spotify now and not on YouTube, you're probably imagining Daniel to look a certain way, right, with this accent. But when you turn to the YouTube, I'm telling you, he looks completely unexpected from what you think.
I used to have longer hair working in the lab, and I think people would really had a lot of trouble going like, hey, wow, this guy's like he's got a degree, he went to school, he's not playing in a band, or you know what I mean, like they'd see me turn up to work and it's woo.
And completely, Daniel is not white as much as his accent may suggest it. So Daniel, on that note as well, since you talk about the lab and all that, what advice do you have for people who are listening in, who might be looking to switch careers, in maybe not as dramatic as the way that you did it, but when you're looking to switch careers, what advice do you have?
I think when it comes to switking careers, that's a good question. That's a tough one. Commit. You're either going to do it or you're not. So don't half past six it. Like you do it, you're going to do it for real. If you want to get practical about it, then set yourself some boundaries. That's fine. When you think about it, try to make sure that you're framing your situation in different lenses. Like I said, it became a lot less scary when I looked at it in the sense that don't tell me I can't get a job between the ages of 28 and 65. Like, come on. Like, even if I went to this and completely and utterly bombed out, I can still do something. Like, that's like, it's not like I take this chance and it's mess with me and my life is over, which I think is a very common thing amongst all countries and all cultures, particularly when it comes to something like I screw up in high school. You know what I mean? Like, that's it for me. And personally, I mean, I did screw up in high school. I had some, on a personal level, I had some issues at home. It was very difficult for me. And I didn't explode until I got to uni. First year of uni, boom, through the roof. And it took me that long. So I don't really like this attitude when people think that they label you from what they sort of see you as down the line, when your life is a very, very long journey. So I say to those people, if you want to change careers, just change. Just do it. I'm still, even now, like, I entertain thoughts about, like, I want to do something. I want to spend more time with the kids. Why not? You got one life. You only got to make yourself happy.
Yeah, since we're talking about uncool and cool, when do you think you were the most uncool, and what do you think you would say to him if you had the chance now?
I don't think, well, to be honest, I don't think I've ever been cool. But if I were to look back at myself, I'd just say, gosh, what would I say? I'd say, don't worry about what other people think. You really only have, it's your life. It's your life. Why live it for other people? You got to live it for yourself. That's really important. Like, we are all from Asian backgrounds, and we all, I'm sure the generation above us have relatives who have sort of suffered for the sake of formality. You know, we're lucky, we're privileged.
What would you say as well to those who maybe want to give Sydney a go?
In terms of coming from Singapore to Sydney, I think that's a tough one. In terms of, we're talking film industry, Australia is notoriously difficult. It is very, very, and this is from having a lot of overseas friends, and as you know from being over here as well. Like, it's difficult. So the first thing is, if you wanted to come and work in the industry, you would have to find a sponsor. Now, that's going to be really tough because you're competing against locals. And this was the advice given to me by someone when I first came to Sydney. If you really want to do it and you find that Sydney or Australia in general is the place that you want to do, find a way to come and then stay in the game from there. So the advice that was given to me by this casting guy when I first came to Sydney was, we see a lot of people sort of come and then sort of like drop off the radar. So find a job, if not close to the industry, and then indulge in the passions that you want to do until you're able to sort of like make that move or what have you. I think it's really tough, though, I'll be honest, in terms of being able to come to Australia from Singapore to do specifically for that job. Like, it can be done, but if you make contacts and, you know, like, approach people, there are always ways.
And it's great that in a way Hollywood came to you. You didn't have to go to Hollywood.
We're very lucky. We're very lucky in that sense in Australia that traditionally, I think a lot of Australian directors are extremely patriotic enough to want to bring a certain part of work back to Australia.
Back to
they'll
home,
shoot,
right?
they'll shoot overseas, but yet the post is done in Australia. And you'd be surprised on just what kind of stuff is done here. You'll think it's very international, but it's really like, you know, all Mortal Kombat was shot in South Australia. Like, it had all the locations there that was needed. So, you know, we're very lucky in that sense. Even like, I think 13 Lives, the Ron Howard film on Amazon at the moment, like the majority of that was shot on the Gold Coast in Australia.
So Daniel, before we let you go, then what's up for you now? And what's next for you?
Generally, I will say, but generally I don't like to say, because it's just that nature of the freelancing. Like, until you get your first paycheck and you're working on the job, then you can say, okay, I'm working on the job, because things can change so fast. You know, yeah.
Yes, until get the first day of shoot,
Nothing's
for
on
me, and the camera starts. Then I know, yes, it's on. Because anytime between then and now, things can happen. I'm like, I changed my mind. I don't want to anymore.
So that's why.
So on and so forth, and then like,
but I will say is, so the plan is that I will be joining the Furiosa team. It's a Mad Max spin-off at the moment. They're filming in Australia, so I'll be Yeah, so that they when they finish shooting, I'll be hopefully the plan is to join the team and continue on from there. So that will be plus as well. It's George Miller. He's amazing. He's a doctor. He went from medical profession to making films.
He should be the next one
You
we're
have something
talking
in
to.
common.
Yeah.
So getting cooler and cooler, huh? I mean, if I'm Interceptor and now you're doing Mad Max, it's just getting so
that's
cool.
that'll be an experience, and that's one where I'm looking forward to sort of like just looking into that world, because I really respect, like what George Miller has done and the team behind him as well. Like I said, I don't normally
Fingers
talk
crossed?
about yes, fingers crossed, because like I've had jobs fall through in the past. Like I said, until you're sitting at the desk getting the first paycheck, or have even signed a contract. Well, again, that's the nature. Sorry, I should probably bring that back round to the nature of freelancing. Is that a lot of it is verbal. A lot of it is verbal until you start on the first day and then you sign something. So in that sense, I don't like to count my chickens before they're hatched. So hopefully the plan is to be able to start. Hopefully I'm able to. And if I do, I'm looking forward to sort of seeing the team, because I know the team from other jobs and stuff, and they're a very nice bunch of people. So it's really, I'd love to. The material will be great, but also, like I said, it has to be tempered against working with some really lovely people.
No matter what the job is, right?
Yeah, it
Just,
doesn't
I
matter.
want to work with you. I want to work with you.
If they ask me,
Yeah.
I will just say yes. I don't even have to ask what kind of job it is.
So if our listeners want to, catch up with you and what you're working on, what are your socials? How can they find you?
Oh gosh, I'm really not cool enough to have socials. I have like an Instagram only because my cousin, I told her, I said, I don't have Instagram. She looked at me like I was like some kind of alien. Like, you don't have Instagram? I'm like, no, I don't. So I got it. So I have an Instagram, which I believe is at Cheese Prata. Believe it or not.
Oh my God, really?
Clearly he's trying to sell
I
us
don't
something.
do a lot. I
They're trying to
literally,
tell us
like, it's open to people to see, but I literally I don't put stuff of myself. It's just interesting things that I see around and that happen to catch my eye. I'll put it up
That's
there.
social media. That's social media.
Yeah.
I know. I'm just wondering, right? Do people like tag like you when they eat cheese prata? Because they think that
Accidentally.
you think it's like official, like, hey, I'm sitting here, just cheese prata slice, and then they tag cheese prata.
I
And it comes
haven't
to you.
had that. I haven't had that. I wish it would, because then at least I would see more pictures. I love cheese prata. Cheese
Okay, I
prata
will
is
the next
like,
time.
it is the food of the gods. I think I love it. My favorite, and it has to be a good like ikan curry.
Oh yes.
Oh,
Oh my God.
I haven't had mutton curry for a long time. Now we're talking about food. My goodness, I can go all day.
I sense a career change. I sense a career change coming on.
Ikan prata.
I mean, did you know that they opened like a hawker center in New York or something in the last
Yeah.
in the last
I think
Really?
so.
Yeah,
Like,
Singapore,
where?
like they opened. They went over to open like a kopitiam in New York in Manhattan. And so
Manhattan?
now you apparently and people are going nuts about it. They are like very happy. They are completely happy to spend like $20 or $25
on
bucks,
prata.
like on
cheese prata.
I
for example.
we have a shop here. If I say $8 prata, you would just fall off your chair.
I can believe it though, because I probably had some of that. But they don't have cheese
No, they
prata.
don't. They don't in Sydney. And trust me, I've
So
looked.
that's an
Trust
idea.
me. Like, I really look. Like, I'm at all the shops. I'm trying to find, where to eat the best prata in Sydney.
Oh, this is like the first person advantage now, right? And so the Australian listeners to this will be like, what the heck is cheese prata? The Singapore guys are all getting ideas now. Like, hey,
maybe
let's all head out
maybe
on the
we should
city and
explain.
open a
Like,
shop.
paratha is, like the fried kind of like bread, Indian sort of style, cooked over a hot plate, and you can eat with egg. You have roti telur. You can have cheese with cheese in the middle, and wow, the cheese. Like, it's already probably not the most healthiest thing on the planet, but then you put cheese, which makes it. Yeah, but it tastes good. It tastes good, man.
At that stage, you're not thinking about health.
And it gets more complex. And it gets so complex. I'm like sometimes I look at the other day, not the other day, but when I look at like tissue prata, for example, I keep thinking like, how did they get that thing to like stand up there, like
man.
this thing, and then
It is.
I tell you what though, it's funny you're talking about like that it does so well in New York. I'm telling like, hey man, if you have a teh tarik compared to like American coffee, of course they're going crazy because they're drinking like, I'm sorry, I don't have a high opinion of American coffee, but Yeah, but you have a Tetarik, you would just be like, oh yeah, that's worth it, man.
Yeah, that's true.
Anyway, no Australian in the right mind will have a high opinion of American coffee.
Yeah,
No, definitely not. It's too
with
good in Australia.
Australian coffee,
Way
yeah.
too good. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the advice to, if people want to go give Sydney a go, don't do film, just teh tarik and cheese prata.
Just go for
Yeah,
cheese
it's fine.
prata.
Yeah.
And for those of you listening in, do remember to click following on our podcast, drop us a like and a 5-star rating because it really does help us create great content for you. And tell your friends about us because it's cool to be uncool.
And with that, we've come to the end of the 4th edition of Uncool. And we would like to say a big thank you to all our listeners over all these episodes. We'll be taking a little break and we hope to drop a new edition soon. If you have any stories that you want to share or even stories that you want to share for yourself on the show, then reach out to us at contact@creatives@work.asia and we will do the rest. Also, remember to drop us a comment, like or subscribe to our channel as every little show of support helps. Until then, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays and best wishes for the new year. We wish you and your families health, happiness, peace and love. And we're looking forward so much to seeing you again soon with stories about how it's cool to be uncool.
Like this show? Then rate it 5 stars and subscribe to us on YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Uncool is a podcast by Creatives at Work. It is produced, written, and hosted by Sean Lee Win Chong and co-hosted by Yen Ling Lo, co-produced by Raven Lim, and edited by Ray Ng. Uncool. It's cool to be uncool.